For many ages, the Eastern world was a mysterious and exotic land to most European citizens. The history of the contacts between the British and Chinese peoples has been fraught with miscommunication, mistrust, and disgust at the two grossly different cultures. Hong Kong, however, became a middle ground to all of this. It was the common link between the British monarchy and the Chinese dynasty, despite the incredible differences in each nation's culture. The exploration carried out by adventurous Britons and Chinese led to early encounters between the two nations, both good and bad. Through Hong Kong, an exchange of ideas and technology eventually took place, bringing these two nations closer together.
Europe's early attempts at exploration of the Eastern world were contributed by brave individuals in primarily Spain, Portugal, and Britain. The Roman Empire could not trade with China by sea, but they maintained a series of trade routes called the Silk Road, named for its primary commodity. Along this route, the Chinese demonstrated their superior art and technology, such as the printing technique. Silk was abundant in China, and Roman aristocrats would pay anything for it. China, in return, received precious metals, furs, and gold. When the Roman Empire fell, trade declined, and was finally revitalized by Spanish and Portuguese traders. Marco Polo was an Italian explorer who made a famous journey to the court of Kublai Khan in China in the 1200s, and his writing brought European interests to the Eastern world. A man named Bartholomew Diaz from Portugal explored around the coast of Africa and found a sea route to the Eastern world, since the Silk Road had become inhospitable. Portuguese traders held the upper hand due to the highly educated Jesuit priests, who translated and aided communication immensely. Matteo Ricci, a bold Jesuit monk, found his way to China in order to convert the Chinese to Christianity. He impressed the emperor himself through his education and eloquence, and became a permanent member of the emperor's staff. After the British defeated the Spanish at sea, trade declined once again. The Spanish and Portuguese were respected in China because they made the effort to learn the language and customs. The British, on the other hand, made no such effort, damaging trade and communication immensely. The Chinese, in their own opinion, were the only civilized race on the planet, and the British seemed barbaric and clumsy to them. The British, in turn, thought themselves more pious and technologically advanced than the Chinese. These prejudices led to early mistrust between the two nations. By 1711, however, the British East India Company had set up an important trade post in Canton, finally giving the British a foothold in Asian trade that would eventually lead to the acquisition of Hong Kong.
"你好，金线，你要买什么东西？"5块。哦。多少？
After the initial exploration of Chinese lands and early encounters with its people, the British set up a trading post in Hong Kong, a stretch of land near Canton on the Kowloon Peninsula. At the time, opium, a drug made from poppy seeds found in Eastern Asia, was highly prized in Europe and illegal in China, who called it foreigner's mud. Though neither nation wished to admit it, however, the opium trade was making them incredibly rich. Finally, the Chinese decided that they had to cut the trade off in 1839. Inspector Lin Zexu was sent to seize all opium, whether owned by British or not, and destroy it. In response, Britain sent a modern navy which crushed the Chinese resistance quickly, forcing them to sign the Treaty of Nanking. The war was low in costs of British money and lives, but they received a major reward. Hong Kong. Captain Charles Elliot, the commander of the British force, was stationed in the area, and he found that the rocky, unfurrowed strip of land was perfect for trade and troop deployment. Under the treaty, Hong Kong became a crown colony and a major trading port. After the Second Opium War, when the Chinese once again violated trade, The British gained the majority of Kowloon Peninsula and claimed it as their own. Hong Kong was now a flourishing crown port with secure and expansive borders, but they agreed to cede it back to the Chinese in 100 years. The early encounters between each nation led to violence, but as the dust cleared, Hong Kong had entered the world as a major trading port.
As Hong Kong flourished, both nations engaged in an exchange of goods and ideas through it. China quickly adapted to the technology and warfare of the West and received British higher education. The British, in turn, received the art, opium, tea, and silk they wanted so desperately. The rate in which Hong Kong flourished led to three 19th century cultural revolutions in mainland China which sought to replace the Chinese economy with Western efficiency. As the opium trade died and World War I raged, Hong Kong began to falter. When the Great War ended, Hong Kong had suffered from a terrible bubonic plague and lost much of its funding due to the war. As Hong Kong attempted to get back on its feet, America joined World War II and began intense fighting in the Pacific Theater in 1941. However, this war actually brought more wealth to Hong Kong. American and British soldiers were stationed in the port, and the people of Hong Kong provided them with lodging, food, and machine parts. By the time the war ended, Hong Kong was prospering once again. However, another change was about to take place in mainland China. In 1949, the Communist Revolution took place, replacing China's regime with communism.
In your opinion, did China's conversion to communism lead to an outburst of Chinese colonialism?
Well, even with Russian changeover to communism, what they tried to do is they wanted to expand their thoughts because communism only works with the absence of other forms of government. So communism tries to spread itself as the Russians did and the Chinese did in their hemisphere.
A flood of refugee industrialists sought shelter in Hong Kong, which still maintained British rule and government. The refugees provided cheap labor for Hong Kong factories, so an age of industrialism took the place of trade, and Hong Kong became an immense manufacturing and financial center. For 20 years, Hong Kong saw the most prosperous time in history. In the 1970s, however, mainland Chinese markets flourished, and many workers who were unsatisfied with the harsh working conditions in Hong Kong chose to leave Hong Kong. Finally, as the British grip on Hong Kong loosened, China demanded for its return. In 1984, the British government signed a treaty with the People's Republic of China, agreeing that they would peacefully leave Hong Kong on July 1, 1997. On that fateful day, a British colony, with 156 years of history behind it, was returned to its rightful owners, the people of China.
The colony and port of Hong Kong was a link between East and West that cast illumination on an otherwise distant and alien world. The British and Chinese people both gained insight on each other's cultures and way of life. Both nations also gained much trade of otherwise unattainable goods through this rocky, barren peninsula. The bold exploration carried out by both nations and the early encounters, both good and bad, between both nations eventually led to an exchange of goods, ideas, and friendships. As the sun sets on the last night of June in Britain's control of Hong Kong, China prepares to regain its own, and a long stretch of history between the Lion of England and the Dragon of China comes full circle.